Hello everyone. We're going to be looking at a video today that has to do with the hatching technique that I want you to use for the next drawing. Um, this is a real-time video, meaning that it's only 15 minutes worth of a drawing that I spent 2.5 hours on today, and I'm going to be doing the 8 to 10 hours worth of drawing in it like we did with the last week's project. But in this project, you probably won't see much, but you can at least get a sense of how the drawing is developing. How quickly I'm working on it, or slowly, let's put it that way. But the pace by which I make the drawing. And that's important in terms of creation of the drawing. And understanding how slowly it'll emerge in terms of making light marks, but how quickly in a certain way that you'll be putting your marks down. So here I'm just I want you to use the straight edge for everything, right? But here I'm just kind of what we call blocking in. So nothing, I'm not making anything that's certain yet. I'm just kind of feeling my way through the drawing. In fact, the whole thing is kind of that way. You just kind of feel your way through the drawing. But the key here is I'm using a technique that the straight line becomes kind of a substitute in a certain way for what we did before with the scribble, so that eventually the drawing will have a whole bunch of straight marks, parallel lines, right? Parallel hatching. And then that will eventually start to accumulate into cross-hatching techniques to create a denser sense of value. See right there, I'm doing a visual measurement, figuring out the width versus the height, for instance. So using the straight edge, you're going to think about the angle of things, and also this drawing's going to force you into doing visual measurement too as well, to figure out the foreshortening of certain elements. Now, as we talked about in the lesson, I want this drawing to kind of utilize two different types of shapes if you can. Architectonic shape, a geometric sort of shape that's represented, of course, by the cement block, and an organic form that is represented by the pumpkin, right? Which I did in the previous drawing. Now, this drawing is kind of similar to the previous drawing in that it's a series of accumulation, I guess you could say, of marks, except we're using the parallel hatching and cross-hatching technique here instead of the scribbles. But it's still very, 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 very important to make your marks in such a way that they're very quickly applied. And notice, I don't know, it's probably hard to see, but that's the way it needs to be for this video at any rate, because I'm drawing so lightly. I just wanted to give you a sense of how rapidly you should move on the drawing, because the other videos I sped up the film, of course. In this one, it's all real time. So there, I'm just adjusting the pumpkin a little bit. But it's got to be a really slow build. This is only 15 minutes worth. I'll show you at the end of the video what the 15 minutes worth looks like. I took a still of it, so you'll see a more fully realized image of it. And then I worked on it for 2.5 hours today, so I'll show you at the end of the video the 2.5 hour version, so you can kind of see it transition from the 15-minute version to the 2 hour version. But what I kind of wanted to show you, and it's in the other videos I've done, the books and the rock and the ball, particularly, I'm using these techniques, but I'm moving very quickly because I sped up the film, of course, right? But you can kind of see I'm still, it's kind of still a fluid process. You can't really see much, in terms of the image, because again, I'm working really lightly here. It's I'm using a 2B pencil for this instead of a HB, just a little softer pencil, so that I can kind of take my hand eventually. I think I'll do it in this video, I'm not sure. I certainly did it for the 2.5 hour drawing, take my hand and kind of wipe over the whole thing just to kind of integrate the marks I'm making. There I'm measuring the height of the pumpkin from stem to bottom and figuring out how many times that fits in the height of the block as I see it. So, just always have to measure, even I have to do it, and I've been doing this for years, right? So measuring, angle approximation. So those lines I'm putting down there for the edges of the block at this point in time are, there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines that are starting to kind of indicate an edge somewhere. But I'm not relying on one line. That's one of the biggest problems that students tend to have, is that they try to document an edge with one single line on a straight when you're drawing an object that's geometric, like a series of books or this block or whatever. The other thing I'm doing is I'm starting to lay in value with parallel hatches. So I'll take the ruler and I'll slide it across the drawing, and then so I'll use the ruler as both a guard. I'll do it with some parallel hatches and use the ruler as a way to guard a certain edge, and I'll just protect an edge, and there I am sliding the ruler as I go. So what I'm doing is kind of working those dark areas now. They're not really dark on the drawing, of course, because I'm building it up slowly, right? But you can slide the ruler as you go, and that's a nice way to kind of keep your parallel lines parallel to each other. As you slide that ruler, you're just kind of pushing the pencil up against the ruler. Now it's not going to be a precise mark that you're making. It should be kind of fluid, and should have a quality of the sketch in a certain way, like we did with the scribble. Except in this case, every mark that you make, instead of being that kind of free-form scribble, is generally speaking, a straight line, because you're using that ruler. Now, the nice thing about using the ruler, we're going to use it with a charcoal technique as well later on, is that it really gives your drawing a sense of structure, because every mark that you make is beholden to an angle at that point. I got to think about those angles when I move that ruler around, right? So it really forces you into making decisions in terms of angular relationships in your drawing. Now, that pertains certainly to the edges of the drawing, right? The edges of the forms, the shapes. But it also pertains to the way I want to do my parallel hatches, right? Because you realize, as we talked about, this drawing is a series of parallel hatches that are kind of interlocking, right? Going in different directions. So you get this kind of crisscross feeling going in the drawing, this and build density and value via that process of crossing the hatches. The thing with this is that you got to go very lightly and go very slowly. Remember, this is an 8 to 10 hour drawing that I want you to kind of create. So moving very slowly in terms of light sense of touch, right? Notice I have a good pace going. I'm not really stopping at all. A person can think too much, I think, when they draw. They can kind of sit there and, what am I going to do next? Sort of kind of get in that mode. So the default is, I'm up in the background there now and just kind of putting parallel lines in up there. You can't really see it. You'll see it in the still image when I show you that at the end of the video here. But we get sometimes lulled into this sense of complacency in the drawing. So I'm just trying to invent certain ways in the drawing to kind of put marks down, right? In this case, I'm putting marks along the length of the block, right? There's some diagonal marks on the top underneath the pumpkin that's starting to form. But it's really light and airy, again, application of materials here. Even though I'm using a 2B, I'm barely putting a dark mark down. Now, see, I'm using the ruler there as a way to protect an edge, and then I'm doing parallel hatches and bumping up against the ruler. So you can use the ruler longitudinally, right? As marking lines along its edge, the length of its edge, or it can kind of be a lateral device where you're right there. See, I'm kind of bumping the parallel hatches right up to the edge, and what I'm doing is protecting the top of the block there, as I do that. I'm pulling out here a little bit just so you can kind of see a little bit more of the video, or of the drawing. So you can kind of see it start to emerge, right? but really lightly. And see how I'm shifting and moving that ruler as I go. I mean, I keep mentioning that, but it's a really important idea because it engenders this notion of fluidity in the process, right? You always have to keep in mind that the drawing is just kind of an evolution. It's not, you don't kind of fill in an edge and then color it in perfectly. It's hard to find out where those edges are, right? Number one, in terms of visual measurement, what's the front side versus the top, which is receding in space and foreshortened. And number two, the angle. I'm still working on those angles. I'm not getting, I'm in terms of the edges of that block form, right? That perspective thing. Very difficult to ascertain the correct angle of all that stuff. So, having that knowledge, as I talked about in the lecture and also the other videos of lines that move away from me are going to go to a vanishing point. So, for instance, the top of each of that plane of the block, corresponding edges, parallel edges, pinch in as they move back, right, in both directions, both to the right and to the left, to vanishing points. So you got to be aware of that when you start to denote the edges of the form. I'm using, by the way, I'm not putting any curves in, so I'm using the, and you'll see it in the finish, well, it's not finished, it's a 2.5 hour drawing, but I'm using the straight edge to facet, to create facets in order to, around the pumpkin, in order to imply a curve, right? I do not want you to put a curve in, no matter what you're drawing. Do not put a curve. Use the straight edge as a way to block in the curve of linear forms. If you're drawing a organic form, it has some curves in it. That's why I like juxtaposing an organic curvilinear form relative to an architectonic form, because it teaches you that you can kind of use the straight edge to navigate both of those types of shapes as you make a drawing. And again, light, right? But pretty quickly, like I'm filling up that whole back area right there just with a series of parallel hatches because I want to start to get some energy going in the background. Work all the way to the edge of the drawing. This is a full sheet of paper. And you can kind of see I have, of course, the inset up there of the image that I'm looking at. Move rapidly. I'm thinking a little bit there, but I'm not spending too much time thinking. I'm kind of testing things out. In a drawing or any artwork for that matter, you make assertions, right? You make statements, and then you amend them if you need to, right? You change them. You model them. You modulate them, right? You mold them in order to make the drawing correct or to make it aesthetically pleasing or whatever the case may be. So keep that in mind as you draw, that you're putting marks down to, maybe they'll be correct, maybe you're getting things correct, but maybe you're not, and but at least you have something to kind of work against, right? So it's literally impossible to work in a vacuum in that regard, to get the mark perfect the first time, right? To get those edges in the right place, to get the angle of the edges in the right place. Just literally impossible to do that. So, so keep that in mind as you work, that you're just kind of, again, like we did with the scribble drawing, you're feeling your way through the drawing by putting marks down. And it's just thousands and thousands and thousands of marks over a long period of time that accumulate to give the drawing a sense of form and value and light and dark and shadow and all that sort of stuff, but also gives it a sense of structure, a sense of, sense that it is representing something that you're looking at, right? Number one, and that it is, has a sense of kind of beauty to it, right? Structure can reveal if you pay attention to structural issues in a drawing or a work of art, certainly there's structural issues in that setup I have, the pumpkin and the cement block, right? But the drawing itself is a set of structures, right? It's controlled by the edges of the drawing, right? The edges of the drawing. I remember when I first, when I was an undergraduate, one of my teachers, one of the first teachers I had, told me about that. Kind of relayed that to me about that notion of the format, right? The edges of the drawing. and that you always have to be beholden to what those edges of the drawing are telling you. Essentially, what he was saying to me, and it's true, is that the format, the edges of the drawing, whatever happens inside of that, creates a certain type of vibe, right? A certain set of properties that exude an energy, right? So, that goes to composition, that goes to the way you lay a mark down. It's all related to those two verticals and those two horizontals, i.e. the edges of the page, right? That's why I want us to start to kind of really think about working to the edge of the page and not just having a small object or set of objects floating in a big field of nothingness, right? So, I'm starting to play around a bit with the cast shadow see that cast shadow that the block is creating to the left there, so I'll play around with that a little bit. I started to document that in the 2.5 hour piece. Of course, the shadow on the left side of the pumpkin. But every line you make in this drawing, I want it to be a result of you having that straight edge in your hand and somehow using that to create marks or as a buffer, to create marks up, to guard an edge, for instance, etc., etc. Because it gives the drawing a language, a kind of legitimacy. And you're not just kind of flailing into nothingness. The angularity of a drawing is really important in terms, again, of its language and also in terms of its representational aspects, in terms of perspective as well, right? So there I'm kind of just doing one little thing there just to kind of make a correction. Now you'll see here in a second the 15 minute worth of drawing or however long I've been working there. So I'll show you a still image of that, and you'll see the kind of looseness of it. There's that's exactly what you were just seeing laying flat there. So that's 15 minutes worth of drawing. And that is the 2.5 hour. So you can kind of see how I just layered and layered and layered and layered and layered, but it's still very light, right? I didn't move into any sort of darkness yet on it at all. It's a very light, sensitive application with lots of marks going in different directions, every one of them made with the ruler, with the straight edge, even the pumpkin. Okay, those are parallel and cross hatches there. So, okay, I hope this is helpful in terms of giving you an idea of how quickly or slowly, in other words, to develop the drawing in terms of a value, but also how the pace of the drawing, how you want to kind of work across the entire sheet of paper to the edges as you develop the drawing. Okay, thanks much.